Right, greetings all, hope this finds you well as always. It's now time for a latest update from the machine shop, what we're on with and what we're up to. Okay, right, first of all, our growing collection of Repton bits has had yet more added to it. That's the 3 crossheads. There's 2 there and another one there. These have been found, they're a single slide bar crosshead, and these have been found that the lower faces of the crosshead, shown on the lower slide bar, which is that face there that's been remetalled, that's been found to have worn, and so they've been remetalled and puddled up, and all that remains now is just to machine them back to the original clearance and whatnot. The top face, the face is currently sitting on the floor is actually the top face. That crosshead's upside down. And the reason it's sitting on a bit of cardboard is that face is pretty much unworn and is still machined. So we sat it on the cardboard so it can't get damaged. But it also means I can use that upper face as the datum to machine the other face, because I can simply just work it to a thickness, which will make it a lot easier. It also saves having to cheese wire up the slide bars to get the required measurements. So that's a little job that shouldn't take too long, but it's also relatively straightforward to do. So there's the 3 there, left hand, right hand and middle, all ready to go. In other jobs on the borer, we saw these axle boxes off 806 last week. We've made a start on machining them using measurements which were provided by Andrew Jeffrey, one of our fitters. He took these measurements of the horn widths, because what we're doing there is we're basically machining that axle box to fit between that pair of horns to those measurements. So using them and the LMA limits and fits, and the column we're looking for is, let me just find it, it's where it says F in R. F being the width of the axle box, R being the width of the horns, and a clearance of between 2 to 10 thou. From experience, we're going for the high end of that because these faces are built up with white metal rather than bronze running on manganese, or manganese running on manganese even. And so we found the larger clearance works best for those. So we're aiming up to about 10 thou clearance on Andrew's numbers, and then those axle boxes can go back in. Incidentally, when they were taken out, they had about 60 thou clearance on them, so they definitely needed doing, let's put it that way. Another job that we've seen before, which has now been finished off, is actually outside. We will just venture through the curtain and outside into the repair shed, and that's the fitted bolts off. Yes, I know that's 806's header. Yes, I know it's still sat there. Yes, I know it's been sat there for several months. Any questions? Anyway, those are the fitted bolts for 75029, which we saw the other week. Mark and Barry Neeson have got them all finished now. They're all in. All lovely fitted bolts. Beautiful job. They've done the other side as well, as you can see, with the new nuts on. And so those just need the bolts all finally flogging up tight, and then they can have the horn liners refitted onto these plates here. And then in turn the axle boxes, which are sat on the floor over there, can then go back onto the wheel set, and the wheel set can go back in the frames. Then we can put the brake table back up, then we can put the motion back up, and then we might have something that will pass for a rolling chassis. So basically the job's moved on, and it's moved on very well. So excellent job there, lads, spot on. We'll just ignore that super heater header, pretend it isn't there. Anyway, right, in other bits and pieces we've been on with, another job that's happened is something for one of the Black 5s, which is just on the bench over here. Now, what we have here was this afternoon's little quick job. It's a new spring hanger bolt for one of the bogie springs on a Black 5. The Black 5 has a compensation beam with a single spring in it, and these two of these bolts, so there's a compensation beam aside of the spring inside the beam, and then 2 of these bolts secure that spring to the beam. Now the problem we had was that one of the old bolts had failed. Now we had this bolt which had been machined as a spare a couple of years ago. We also had a nut. The only thing was the nut was actually machined for a slightly undersized bolt. So this afternoon's job has been to set that nut up in the Harrison lathe, and then gently and carefully pick up the thread and then chase it out by about 60 thou-ish to then make it as a nice running fit on the new bolts. So that's done and all ready to go back into the bogie tomorrow. That hole there, incidentally, is for a split pin. That's basically so that if the nut vibrates loose, it can't come completely off the bolt. So anyway, another little job that's also been done is these. They're the half shell bearings for the engines of the steam crane. They were found to be very heavily worn, so they've been remetalled with new white metal. They're currently just sat in the halves of the bearing. I forgot what these are called, actually. There is a fancy word for them. I've forgotten what it is. The two outer halves of the bearing. The shells are sat in there just to basically keep them all together. And also, so I can get an idea, you can see how there needs to be a slight clearance between the shells when the board decides, so I can measure that gap, work out what it is, and then sort some suitable shim material to be clamped between the two halves of these when they're put into the lathe and board to finish size. And then Brian's been at it again. He's a little demon, he is, this man. You really can't stop him. First of all, we've seen these bits for the J27's gauge frame fittings last week, but then he also went on and made these two little beautiful things, which are a pair of bungs that go into a drain point on the main steam pipe of the crane. So they're completely... The old one was a wee bit tired. That head was originally supposed to be hexagonal, but a lot of years of use of it's seen better days, shall we say. The thread's not the best either. So Brian, on Friday, finished off two lovely little ones of these, new threads and all. Lovely job, absolutely spot on. Right, another final bit of the crane, because, as I said, it's one of our priority jobs at the moment, the crane. It's in for a bit of TLC, yeah, because it's rather a critical bit of kit. It's also a priority at the moment. So another little job that I'll just walk down and show you in a minute, some buffer pins, which Mark's busily setting up in the Colchester to machine. There's the big ends and little ends, some lubricators to have a look at, and some other bits and pieces. And one of the things we're on with here is actually in the little shaper. Now, we got this set up a couple of weeks ago, and I've actually only recently got time to actually get my head around how it works and how to use it. We had to modify it slightly. I had to make a new tool holder because the existing tool holder had a wee bit too much spring in it. But it's a very nice little piece of kit, actually. As I said, a lot of years ago, I've never actually used one of these in anger, and so it's been a very educational thing. The idea is, this is your cutting tool here. It's connected to this ram here, which then works its way forwards and backwards when the machine's running. The tool cuts on the push stroke when it's travelling outwards. On the return stroke, the tool holder is mounted into this, which is called the clapper box. The idea is that as it returns, that lifts, and so the tool travels simply straight across the work, and then on the return stroke, or the cut stroke, it falls back and cuts again. Okay. Now, before he gets overexcited, yes, this normally has guards on it. I'm temporarily running them without them, purely so we can actually see what's going on, okay? So, first of all, we start at the motor. The motor starts. Now, the cut is put on with this feed screw up here. So if we put the slight cut on, that basically lowers this tool slide here, which then feeds that tool bit into the work, okay? And then this lever here is a clutch, which when engaged, the old beast starts to do its stuff, okay? Now, you'll notice this little mechanism on the side of it gently starts doing its stuff. This is a little auto feed for the table. It's really quite an elegant piece of kit. All we have to do is set that little ratchet for the direction in which you want the table to travel, and you'll see how it starts to wind this screw here. This screw is in turn connected to that block there. This is all driven through this wonderfully Heath Robinson crank mechanism, and as we can see, as the work slowly advances across, the shaper gently starts cutting, gently applying material off. These machines are a bit old hat, but they do the job, and the major advantage of this machine is it's sort of fire and forget. I can set it going on this job, just leave it running, it'll gently just carry on, gently applying chips off that piece of bronze. I go and do something else, and just listen to the noise, basically. When the noise stops, I know it's time to go and reset it for another cut. And there's also, strangely, a lot of people have discovered this, there's something wonderfully therapeutic about watching the machine work. Unfortunately, the therapy hasn't coped forever, that was in the stores, but never mind. Anyway, it's something wonderfully satisfying about watching this machine work. It's a wonderfully therapeutic little piece, very effective piece of kit, actually. I'm rather taken with it myself. So, anyway, right, we'll just stop that for a sec and turn her off. And I'll just have a quick wander down to the other end of the shop. Hopefully whoever's having the destruction derby up in the stores won't follow us. And just a quick one down here to show a little job Mark's busily setting up in the Colchester lathe. This is going to become some buffer beam pins for the crane. Mark's been setting them up this morning. Now, the way we're doing this is that piece of steel is slightly too big to go through the bore of the spindle of the lathe. So I've been teaching him how to set up and use a steady this morning, simply so he can hold the end of the work, face it off. He's then going to centre drill it, and then these are to become two large pins. Well, there's actually four of them. The large pins, which act as hinge pins on the buffers of the crane. The idea is the buffers can be swung out of the way if you're doing a lift where you need to get in particularly close to whatever it is you're lifting. So anyway, that's another little job we're on with. This incidentally is all on major steel storage. You'll see the various colour codes on it and whatnot. That's simply so we can tell the different grades of steel. All the rods and sods lying around, a load of spare rod brasses, and our stash of spare drill bits and whatnot. So anyway, there you go, folks. Hope you found it educational, informative as always. Take care, and I'll see you around.